Right off the bat, let's address the elephant in the room that no runner wants to confront, but probably should. Your heart rate zones are wrong. Why? Because we're all using the universal equation of your max heart rate equals 220 minus your age, and assigning your heart rate zones from there. It probably goes without saying, but everyone has different maximum heart rates despite your age. In fact, research shows that your maximum heart rate remains relatively steady between your 20s and your 30s. And then as you age, the rate of decline is slower if you have a higher fitness level. And the more you learn about this rule, the worse it gets. It was first established in the 1970s and wasn't intended for runners at all. Instead, it was consisting of the general population, including those with cardiovascular diseases, smokers, and those taking cardiac medications. And we as healthy runners should follow the same equation? But here is a simple solution. In fact, I have two more major problems with heart rate training, and I'll give you quick fixes for all of these as well. Please, at the very least, ditch the old equation and use this equation instead, which is clinically tested to be more accurate for healthy individuals. But even though this helps a little bit, it's still quite a generic formula, which I know you Run Smarter scholars want to move away from. So again, I have another solution. This involves customizing your heart rate zones based on your own heart rate and fitness level. And all that's required is a simple fitness test. Here is exactly what to do. Step 1, put on a reliable heart rate monitor. Chest straps are always better and more accurate compared to wrist watches. Warm up for 10 minutes while mixing in 4 faster strides. Step 2, perform a 30-minute time trial, keeping all other variables consistent. For example, I chose to do my test on a treadmill with an incline of 1% and the temperature of the room set to 18 degrees Celsius. Step 3, after the test, look at your heart rate data and get your average heart rate for the last 10 minutes of the test. You can start a lap on your watch for the final 10 minutes to get this data. For me, my average heart rate was 172. But it's important to highlight that this isn't your heart rate max. Instead, this is your threshold heart rate. But we can still use this number and build out your training zones. I follow my advice from Dr. Will O'Connor, who has a great video explaining this, and I'll leave that in the description. And he calculates zone 2 training to be between 75 and 85% of your threshold heart rate, which for me is between 129 and 151 beats per minute. So now we have your tailored training zones, but we run into another problem that isn't very well known and is a phenomenon called cardiac drift. I was first introduced to this effect when chatting with running researcher Cody van Rassel on the Run Smarter podcast. And a cardiac drift is when your heart rate slowly creeps up during a prolonged bout of running despite the intensity remaining the same. The primary cause is believed to be dehydration, leading to a reduction in blood volume, making it more difficult to circulate. The second contributing factor is the redirection of blood flow to the surface of the skin to aid with cooling the body, further decreasing the blood returning to the heart. This is an issue for heart rate training because it can misinterpret your intensity level and you can start training at an intensity not intended for that session. This may not happen all the time. For instance, I did a 70-minute run on the weekend and didn't see any upwards drift. But I've done some sweat rate tests in the past and I know I have a particular low sweat rate and it was quite cold that day. So I need to learn which conditions actually generate a cardiac drift, and I suggest you do the same. And when this phenomenon does happen to you, a way to solve the problem is to train at a different measure of intensity. And I have two options for you. I have the free option and the more accurate option. The free option is learning to run based on your rate of perceived exertion, or RPE out of 10. Your easy runs should be set at a 3 out of 10 intensity, which is the same as zone 2 training when using your heart rate. So next time when your watch tells you you're running within zone 2, before you enter that cardiac drift, see how this zone 2 feels within your body. Then when you start to experience the cardiac drift during your long runs, move away from relying on your heart rate and start running based on effort. But if you want the more accurate option, you can train with power zones. One of the best and most popular devices are the power foot pods from Stride. And luckily they sent me one to try out. You clip it onto your shoe, connect it to your device and choose power as a data field. Now you can use watts instead of heart rate to guide your training intensity. And now for those long runs, it won't matter if your heart rate starts to drift up because you now have a consistent, reliable, real-time power meter as your guide. It even uses power zones similar to how you would use heart rate zones that will constantly adjust as you get fitter and faster. Cody published several papers on power training and he explained the practical uses in more detail.
Running outside in a hilly terrain, if you're running in gravel, if you're running against a headwind, and your goal is to run at 200 watts, zone 2 for 80 minutes that day, and that's your workout. You'll slow your running speed as you approach a hill, and you'll try to maintain the 200 watts so that you're having the same kind of metabolic requirements for any given exercise intensity.
This brings me to another problem with heart rate training, and that is combating elements such as hills, dehydration, temperature, sleep, stress, caffeine. All of these things affect your heart rate and lead to training inaccuracies. Not to mention the lag in heart rate when you increase your intensity too quickly. For example, you might have on your training plan to do 4x200 meter efforts at zone 5, but that's nearly impossible to measure with heart rate because it takes time for your body to register that intensity and increase the heart rate to the necessary zone. In this case, you can fall back to RPE or use pace, or you can use power. Heart rate still has its place though. And if I was doing a steady state run under 60 minutes on a terrain that's relatively flat, I'd be happy to use heart rate zones. But during my hilly runs, longer runs, or quick interval sessions, I'll be using power or RPE as my metric of choice. And what about if I told you that you can use this data, whether it's heart rate, power, or RPE, and use it with the most up-to-date research in such a way that it protects you from a future injury? If you could do that, that would mean training with more consistency, leading to faster running and better performances on race day. If that interests you, I break down the research in this video, so you can click on it right now and I'll see you there.